As far as divorces go, the Czech Republic and Slovakia separated in 1992 without bloodshed, either figuratively or literally. Was it the Velvet Revolution that both countries tell us? Or are they just good friends with the occasional barbs, like in a velvet divorce? And what have they lost and gained as a result? Join me, Jan Darasz, for How We Got Here.
The history of Czechoslovakia began as a marriage of convenience. The Czechs, up until 1918 under Austrian rule, were joined in wedlock with the Slovaks, former Hungarian subjects, following the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. It was a peculiar union of highly industrialized Bohemia, Moravia, parts of Silesia, and the more agrarian Slovakia. A reputation for democracy, tolerance, and progressiveness provided the country with both economic and social stability throughout the interwar period. Following World War II, specifically from 1948 until 1989, Czechoslovakia was part of the Eastern Bloc, albeit seen as its most technologically advanced and culturally most Western-minded. But by the 1960s, Czechoslovakia's centrally planned economy was faltering. Intellectuals and economists called for reforms, decentralization, limited market mechanisms, and freedom for enterprises. In January 1968, reform-minded Slovak Alexander Dubček took the reins of the Communist Party, abolished press censorship, and even suggested the possibility of a multi-party government, something that Moscow perceived as sacrilege. Eventually, the experiment was squashed by a joint Warsaw Pact force of 165,000 troops and 4,600 tanks. The Soviets forced the Prague Spring leaders to roll back all the reforms and implanted a new leadership under Gustav Husak. However, himself a Slovak, Husak made sure that one reform remains in place: the restructuring of Czechoslovakia into a federation of the Czech and Slovak Socialist Republics. Passed in October 1968, the overall recognized Slovakia's equal status in a union previously dominated by the Czechs. With communism gone in 1989, this move, the perceived underrepresentation of the Slovaks in federal politics, their fears over the Czechs' industrial superiority, and their centralizing tendencies led to what historians now call the Velvet Divorce. On January 1st, 1993, Czechoslovakia was no more, with Czechs and Slovaks peacefully parting their ways.
Our guest today is Dr. Krzysztof Dębiec. He's a senior fellow at the Central European Department at the Centre for Eastern Studies, based here in Warsaw. Welcome to the programme.
Good afternoon.
We'll go a bit further. We started in 1918. That was the point at which these new states began to emerge from the First World War. But the Austro-Hungarian Empire, what was the status of the Slovak nation and the Czech nation within that empire?
So basically we have to say that Austro-Hungarian Empire was not an entirely uniform state. There was an Austrian part and Hungarian part since 1867. And they were strikingly different. The Austrians had under their part a lot of nations, including Poles in Galicia and Ukrainians in Eastern Galicia, and Czechs in Bohemia and Moravia and Silesia. The main target of the Austrians was not to make a uniform, was not to create a uniform nation, but to create conditions for cooperation of nations that are loyal to the emperor. On the contrary, the Hungarians were themselves decades fighting against the monarchs in Vienna, made a lot of effort to subjugate the nations they lived within their parts, and Slovaks were one of them. For around 2 generations, there were no Slovak secondary schools.
So they had 2 different philosophies of
exactly. The Czechs could develop their elites, while the Slovaks had it much more difficult, and thus the starting point in 1918 was strikingly different. The Czechs had developed elites, broad elites, while the Slovaks very narrow ones, and they needed time that they gained during the first decade of the common state to create people who could take over some positions.
And what was the idea? What was the point of Czechoslovakia in 1918? You mentioned that the different societies, different traditions, different histories. Was it some diplomat who saw lines on a map and delineated borders with a crayon? Why did these two different societies come together, or were brought together?
Well, these were two different societies, but in cultural sense, in linguistic sense, they were very close to each other. From 15th to 19th century, Slovakized Czech language was the language of Slovak literature, and actually it was as late as mid-19th century that the Slovaks, through Ľudovít Štúr, decided that they want to develop their own language based on local dialects, and not to be just a local dialect of Czech language. By the way, Czech and Slovak remain very close, and there are some linguists who claim that some German dialects are more distant to one another than Czech and Slovak. That's the one thing, the cultural linguistic proximity. The second thing was personalities. Tomáš Garrigue Masaryk, who was the founding father of Czechoslovakia, was born precisely on current Czech-Slovak border in Hodonín. He himself called himself Slovak, but not in the sense being of Slovak ethnicity, but he was native to Moravian Slovakia, Slovacko region. Before World War I, we've had Hungarian Slovakia, which is what we currently think of Slovakia, and Moravian Slovakia, which is the Czech region, or Moravian region, which is culturally very close to their neighbors.
And did these countries gel? Did they cooperate together well in the interwar period? New national consciousness, new statehood. How did that work out?
Through the Slovak side, as I mentioned before, there were not a lot of people who could be or pose as a force that could create some events. There were
intelligentsia.
Yeah. There were. Again, personalities, and especially one personality, Milan Rastislav Štěpánik. He was a pilot, probably French spy, later French general, who was a former student of Masaryk in Charles University in Prague, and they collaborated closely. With Masaryk being the head or unquestionable head of the project of the government in exile, while Štěpánik was his close ally, his deputy, and with time they also established contacts with some representatives of Slovak resistance in the country.
Okay, we'll kick off now the second clip from 1945 and bring it up to this Velvet Revolution or Velvet divorce and its implications today.
The aftermath of the Velvet Divorce could best be described as two-speed development. The Czech Republic implemented market reforms faster, stabilized its economy more quickly, and started with a higher level of industrialization and infrastructure, so it caught up with the West sooner. Slovakia had a slower start. Vladimir Mečiar's rule of 1993 to 1998 was more authoritarian and isolationist, which slowed down integration with the West. But then, especially in the 2000s, there was rapid development, partly thanks to attracting investments. When Slovakia split from the Czech Republic, it remained structurally dependent on Russian gas and oil, delivered via the Druzhba pipeline. Unlike the Czech Republic, which developed links to Western oil and gas sources, landlocked Slovakia had fewer diversification options. On the political front, Slovakia would become friendlier with Russia during Prime Minister Robert Fico's first two tenures, 2006 to 2010 and 2012 to 2018, respectively. In his third term, Fico re-emerged even more overtly pro-Russian and critical of the EU, something that marred Bratislava's relationship with Prague. Czech-Slovak relations hit a new low after the March 2024 meeting between Slovakian Foreign Minister Juraj Blanar and his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov in Antalya, Turkey. Following this, the Czechs decided to cancel the Czech-Slovak governmental consultations scheduled for the following month, an event whose format was initiated in 2012 by none other than Fico himself. The upcoming Czech parliamentary elections, scheduled for October 3rd and 4th, may affect Czech-Slovak relations in a surprising way. One of the contenders, Andrej Babiš, former Czech PM and leader of the populist ANO party, is an outspoken opponent of Ukraine's EU membership and a close ally to Fico. Polls show ANO leading the charts at almost 32% against Fiala's pro-European electoral alliance Spolu. If ANO wins, Babiš's appointment as Czech PM would not only have political implications for the region, but also highlight how intertwined Czech and Slovakian affairs continue to be. He is, after all, Slovak-born and about to face up against not just Fiala, but also another candidate, Japanese-born Czech Tomio Okamura, leader of the populist nationalist Freedom and Direct Democracy Party.
The image I get of from what you said about Czech and Slovak history and traditions and consciousness is that this was a gap between the two outlooks, Hungarian history one and Austrian history in the other, that weren't repaired after 1945, and the paths between the two countries seem to get ever wider. Is this would this be an accurate description of how it happened? And so the Velvet Divorce was not a surprise, I suppose.
Yes, famous Czech historian Michal Steklik, who is a specialist in Czech-Slovak relations, in Slovak history as well, he claimed that was it not for the communist regime that silenced the nationalist voices, the Velvet Divorce or the divorce would probably have happened around 1970s. The communist regime stopped certain tendencies or froze them, but the opening of the public debate in late 1989 let the ghost out of the shell, or let the
cat out of the bag.
Yeah. And it turned out that the Slovaks for years were convinced that there were second-class citizens, while the Czechs increasingly felt that they have to pay for poorer Slovakia.
Right. So it was always a poor cousin.
Yeah, or brother or sister, whatever you call it. And at some point, it became clear that the negotiations are leading nowhere. And although the political forces in Czechia and Slovakia that were elected in mid-1992, in the June 1992 elections, did not explicitly have the divorce in their programs, they settled it because they saw no better alternative. Basically, the Czechs wanted a possibly strong state.
Yeah.
The Slovaks opted for federation or even confederation, possibly loose with possibly strong competences for lower level separate governments and not for the federal one. And probably one of the deciding factors was that already in the second half of 1992 it became clear that the federal government in Prague cannot exercise practically in its power in Slovakia, and that was the case of Gabčíkovo-Nočmaroš water dam that the Slovaks decided to build on, contrary to what the federal government in Prague promised to Hungarians.
Sure. What accounts for the lack of bloodshed in this split? We've seen the split of post-communist Yugoslavia, for example. Lots of other countries, when they split, there's an incredible amount of violence and conflict. Why? And yet the split between Slovakia and Czech Republic has been almost praised as this bloodless revolution. What accounts for the lack of violence in this?
Some people say that we shouldn't talk about certain national features, but others claim the contrary. And those who, if we were to talk about certain Czech national features, one of them is certain pragmatism, and they were from A to Z pragmatic in this respect. They were even the ones who made first suggestion about the possibility of having separate states, just for pragmatic reasons. So that's one thing. The stronger partner didn't want to keep the weaker partner at all cost. The second one, there were no border issues. The current Czech-Slovak border, in its main part, was set in Middle Ages, so
everybody knew that who was where.
Yeah, it was of course the border between the Bohemian Kingdom and Hungarian Kingdom, but still it was where it is today, more or less. So that's the second issue. The question about the splitting the wealth of the common state, there was a simple rule: 2 against 1. Czechs are more or less 2 times more numerous than Slovaks, so that was the rule that was applied and agreed upon. I would say that there was no history of violence of Czechs against Slovaks and Slovaks against Czechs. There were some grudges, of course, but it was nothing serious. And the very fact that it was the elites that decided even kept some intellectuals thinking that it was the state that was taken from them,
yes,
and not on the contrary.
Is there any residual nostalgia for the old state of Czechoslovakia, or have the two societies, having gone their separate ways, just accepted their own histories and their own futures?
I think basically because we have the European Union, we have the North Atlantic Alliance. It's almost like Czechoslovakia existed until today. There is no reason to recreate it. There are no borders because of Schengen zone. There's internal market. They have military pact, yes, being members of NATO. Slovak students, who are numerous listeners in Czech universities, especially in Brno, which is the capital city of Moravia, can study using Slovak language. with exception of some linguistic courses, of course, but basically they can live as if they were living in the common state. So there's no reason to recreate. It was the EU and NATO that helped recreate Czechoslovakia.
And what are the, bringing things right up to date, elections in the Czech Republic next month in October, what are the implications, if any, of the Velvet Revolution, the echoes of the revolution on Czech politics? Or is it now, what's the main issue? Is it the fact that Slovakia is, as you wrote in your paper, Slovakia and the Czech Republic have parted strategically? Fico goes over generally to Russia, the Czech Republic more closer to the West. Is that the issue that will dominate the Czech politics, or is it something, the economy, domestic issues?
I would say that it's as we say in Poland, the bread topics that dominate the election campaign, rather. But still, this, of course, Czechs and Slovaks are culturally, linguistically very close, but they, for some reason, constitute separate nations. And one of these reasons is separate history and certain resulting inclinations, so to say. Slovak society, together with Bulgarian one, is one of the most pro-Russian in the European Union. They want to be the leader of support for Ukraine League, so to say.
Yeah. How will the elections affect relations with Poland, big neighbour to the north? How does Poland see the upcoming elections? Or does it know much about the Czech Republic and Slovakia? I get the impression that Poland seems to go east and west. We need to know a lot about Germany. We need to know a lot about Russia, but about the Czech Republic and Slovakia, we know very little. Is that an oversimplification?
It's a simplification, but not a big one. I tend to repeat when we meet our interlocutors from the public administration or journalists that the Czech Republic, for example, is the second biggest recipient of our export. And we have the biggest border with Czech Republic, of course, and that's also a lot of transborder issues to deal with. Slovakia is also our neighbor, and geography is something that we have to basically take into account. Surely the Czech-Polish relations nowadays, they are probably the best ever, or one of the best for sure, and one can hardly imagine they can get better, but one can imagine that can get a little worse. It seems that the biggest stumbling blocks are resolved, and we shall see how the new, probably Babiš government would deal with the current government in Poland. Yeah. What stance it would take. But my suggestion would be that he would probably concentrate rather on domestic policy. And he would seek regional partners rather in Slovakia and Hungary.
Dr. Dębiec, thank you very much for coming on to the programme. Great to have you, and fascinating discussion about the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
That's all we have time for today. Do join us next time, Tuesdays 21:35, 35 minutes past 9 CET. Join us then.